So we see a couple of things, kind of themes across this sixth Sunday in Easter, that we see some really good news. What's interesting is we go back to John 14, right? I mean, we've been spending a lot of time at the end of the books of the Gospels, right? That's normally the time of Easter season. We kind of get towards the end of the story in some ways, though Luke so accurately and adeptly reminds us that in the way that he writes both his gospel and then the Acts of the Apostles, and they overlap the ending chapters and the beginning chapters, is that what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. Now, if that's not a whole nother sermon in itself, right, with what we're going through. But I think it's really quite interesting to me that here on this Sunday we have this, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. You may remember, I share this often, but we have during Holy Week, Maundy Thursday, right? And Maundy Thursday is the Thursday before Easter. And Maundy comes from the word mandate, mandate. Because another way to translate this is not, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Instead, it's Jesus is saying, if you love me, you will keep my mandates. I think that's a very different relationship with commandments. Mandate. A mandate is not optional. It's not something you can take or leave. A mandate is something you must do. And we must keep his mandates. Those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. And what has Jesus revealed to us about his mandates is that he summarizes the commandments, right? And this isn't a new summary. I think there's a perception among Christians that Jesus is doing something new. The old man had been on the throne with his long beard and all of his rules. He was like the greatest generation, right? And then in came the hippies, Jesus. And he wore sandals and he was like, hey man, relax. I'm going to teach you something new. And I think without realizing it, a lot of us preachers and clergy have kind of given that impression, and we've let that impression ferment. That Jesus is doing something new. That he's casting off the rigid father. The problem with that is twofold. One is that it's completely untrue scripturally. And the second part of it is without really intending to be, it's rather anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. It's somehow taking away that Judaism is full of love. That the teachings of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, are full of love. I think we have this impression because, let's be honest, we haven't done a whole lot of reading, much less studying of the Old Testament. So we love to really beat up on Leviticus, for instance, right? But when Jesus says there are two great commandments, summarized as to love God with all your heart and soul, in body, he means your whole being, to love God with your whole being. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. He's saying love God with all your being and love your neighbor with all your being. And on this summary rest all the laws and the prophets. He's actually not teaching something new. He's reminding his audience, first of all, of the Shema, which is still repeated in synagogue, which is to love God from Deuteronomy. And there's several verses there that are repeated. And then from Leviticus, where there's a very clear teaching about loving your neighbor and loving strangers. I think so many of us have this impression of Leviticus, which isn't completely undeserved. I mean, everybody struggles. Anybody who has Leviticus in their holy books, we struggle with it. But laced within it is the clue to what it's trying to do, maybe not so well, but nonetheless trying to do, which is it's about loving your neighbor. It's not about you. Now that's timely. That's a message for us today. That it's not about us. Right? I want to share with you a little story. This is the quintessential English village. It's Eyam Parish, Eyam Village. It's in the north of England. And in 1666, it had a population of 750 residents. And so you can see, just if you were going to vacation in England, right, this is where you want to stay. This beautiful village. And this is one of the houses that dates back to 1666. But in 1666, something was happening 150 miles away. Raging in London and upwards to Cambridge, which you can see just above London, the bubonic plague had hit. And in the course of just a couple of years, 25% of London would die from it. You see, plagues, we need to be reminded, are nothing new. Plagues have been hitting the world on and off since the very beginning. And we like to think, I think, that there are things that we know about the plague, about plagues, that somehow folks in the past didn't know. That we're kind of smarter than them, right? But the truth is that they knew a lot of things that would be surprising to, I think, many of us, which is that they knew that it was transferred between humans and objects. So in 1666, a delivery of fabric was sent up from London and arrived in Eyam. It was damp, and so they dried it out and then put it in the shop window, and they proceeded to sell it. And in short order, most of the folks who worked in that shop became ill and died. And at that moment, the village realized the plague had come to the village. It had traveled 150 miles. Up until then, it had not really hit that part of England. And so here is the St. Lawrence Parish. And the rector, the rector of St. Lawrence Parish, had been there for a year. Can you imagine? 1 year as rector. So he got together with his predecessor, who had been there for many decades, and they devised a plan. This is William, I'm always going to say his name a little off, Maupassant. He was the rector. And so they devised a plan, and they presented to the village, and the village agreed to it, which is that they would place on the edge of the village, all around it, these stones. These stones would form the boundaries of the village. And no one from the village would go past those stones in order to contain the plague to Eyam village. And so in order to get goods in and out, what they did was that they would post at the edge where those boundary stones were what they needed, and it would be delivered to that boundary stone. And they would drop the coins in the boundary stones in those holes, and they were filled with vinegar. And they would also put it in this well so that the coins would be cleansed, so they would not pass the plague to those they were paying. They also could not gather in their churches, in their church, in their beautiful church. So they gathered in this space that's on the edge of town, that's a natural amphitheater, and that's where they had morning prayer. And they stuck together by families. So you can see them grouped in this painting here. So they stuck together as families. Does this not sound familiar? The thing is that over the next 14 months, the rector would lose his wife, Catherine. The plague annihilated the village. It killed more than a third. And there were rules in place that you had to bury your own family. So there were no funeral services in the church. So that's why dotted throughout in and around the village are these tombstones from that time, because people were buried near where they lived. That's why the rector's wife is buried on the village green near the church, for instance. This remembers the Hawksworth family. You can see that Peter, the third victim, died on September 23rd. Humphrey died age 15 months. Their son died on October 17. Jane, Peter's wife, was the sole survivor in the household. Altogether, including her in-laws, she lost 25 relatives. Here's the thing. Jane had to bury her husband herself, to dig the grave herself. And she had to bury her son, Humphrey. This is a window in the parish church which memorializes this event. Now, friends, I share this story with you because I'm aware that it's a sad story. And I know most Sundays I've been trying to deliver a little bit more upbeat. But as we head into phase one, I think that it's important that we hear this message. That plagues have hit our communities in the past. And communities have sacrificed economically as well as their personhood for their neighbor. You see, by Eyam Parish doing what it did, Eyam Village doing what it did, while a third of them died, which is similar to the number of folks who died in London, the plague was contained. And it didn't go to the surrounding counties. Eyam saved the north of England by doing what they did. It rather reminds me of Jesus' teaching also, right? No greater love has a person than to lay down his life for his friend. There are measures that we need to take. God has gifted scientists and the medical community to guide us through this time. And I know it's easy to look and to say, well, I mean, thankfully, not that many people have passed. Right. Because we in this city have listened to science and medicine, which is a gift from God. And we need to continue to do that. Because, my friends, I have to say that as adults, we can rush out and we can congregate and we could do all of that. But then what is that going to mean for our kids come school time? If we're all busy, not wearing our masks, not still taking precautions, could this flare up again? As Christians, what does it cost us? This inconvenience on our life? I mean, we're not like Ian Parrish. And yes, I take it seriously because I was presumed to have it. And I put on a brave face. But for about a week, every day I woke up and I could breathe a little less. When I see people post on social media that they don't know how serious this is, oh, you want to talk about one enraged priest. It's serious, friends. And you don't want anyone you love to get it. And Jesus says, who is my neighbor? My neighbor is everyone. So when he says that we have to keep his mandate of loving God and loving our neighbor, he is talking about loving our entire community. And it is important as Christians, as people of faith, for us to set an example. I miss being with you all in church. I mean, for goodness sakes, I went into the priesthood. I mean, I work for the church. I'm in it all the time. So I get it. But if we have to do this for a period of time of where we continue to gather online and continue to gather over Zoom and practice these measures so that we can ensure the health of our community, I mean, is that really that big of a sacrifice? As Peter wrote, for it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. But is it that suffering? And I have to say, friends, it's not. What's suffering is getting this disease. So let us be patient. Let us be patient and let science and medicine do what they've been called to do, what they've been gifted by God to do. Let them study it. Let them figure out how we can be healthy and safe. Because, friends, I have to tell you, after it looked like I'd come down with this, I had this unbelievable fear, right? Because I didn't have any symptoms on that last Sunday we gathered in person. But within a day, I had symptoms. And I had this unbelievable fear that I may have passed it on to one of you. That's happened to churches. I've seen the interviews of where choirs passed it on to one another, where congregations passed it on to one another, where clergy passed it on to their congregations. Friends, I want to see you, but I want to see you safe and healthy. So there are things we can do right now. We can either sit around and feel completely defeated, or we can say, well, it's not exactly how I want it. You know, I mean, Zoom isn't, it's just not the same. It's a little odd kind of way. Friends, get over it. Get on the Zoom call. Join a small group. We're expanding them at both churches. Hop in. You can join with your computer. You can join just by dialing your phone the old-fashioned way. And listening and participating in it. It feels good to see those of you who join in on it, to hear how you're doing. And here's the thing, is while today's sermon's a little bit of a downer, I'll admit it, those Zoom calls, I mean, honestly, the Zoom calls that cause me fatigue are the meeting ones. Those can get, but the Zoom calls where I get to see you all and to share with you and to pray and to read scripture, those get me through the week. I love seeing you all. I love interacting with you. I love when you call me and when we chat over the phone. If you are lonely, if you need someone to talk to, call me. And please, so many of you call and go, I know you're busy, but please stop saying that. I am busy. But you know what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that phone conversation with you. Friends, I love you. I've been called to serve with you, to walk alongside of you. But you also have been called to this same calling. So reach out to one another. The directories are now up on both websites. Check your email. It has the password so you can access. If your information's wrong, let us know. We'll get it corrected right away. So it'll be right there online. You can print it out. It's a PDF, or you can just look at it on your phone. It's so easy to get to on the website. Call each other, text each other, reach out. Because the thing is that after 14 months, EM Parish got through it. What's extraordinary is that no one crossed the boundaries, right? But after 14 months, it ended. And life began to go back to, probably a new norm, but still a normal. And they went back to farming and trading and going to church and living out their lives. This will pass. But in the meantime, let us not lose touch with one another, and let us not lose touch with God.